In the heart of Washington, D.C., there was a woman who had become a household name. She wasn't just another politician. She was someone people couldn't stop talking about. Her name? Jasmine Crockett. A congresswoman from Texas, Jasmine was known for her fiery speeches and unapologetic stance on issues that mattered most to marginalized communities. Whether it was speaking out against racial injustice or advocating for equal opportunities, Jasmine always seemed to have something powerful to say. Her rise to fame wasn't overnight. It came after years of hard work, countless late nights drafting policies and standing up in rooms where she often felt outnumbered but never outmatched. People admired her courage, and many saw her as a voice for those who didn't have one. But with admiration also came criticism. Not everyone agreed with her style. Some found her too bold, too direct. Yet no one could deny that when Jasmine spoke, people listened. On the other side of the country, Ellen DeGeneres was preparing for another episode of her wildly popular daytime show. Known for her warm smile, quirky humor, and "be kind" mantra, Ellen had built an empire around spreading positivity. For decades, she'd been a beloved figure, hosting celebrities, cracking jokes, and making audiences laugh until their sides hurt. Recently, though, Ellen decided to dedicate a week of her show to conversations about unity, a chance to bring together voices from all walks of life under one roof. The idea sounded great on paper, but things don't always go as planned. That day, Jasmine Crockett was invited to appear as a guest. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect pairing, two strong women sharing insights on how to bridge divides in America. But what unfolded behind the scenes, and eventually on live TV, would leave millions stunned. As soon as Jasmine walked onto the set, the energy shifted. She carried herself with confidence, her bright blazer catching the studio lights. The audience clapped politely, some cheering louder than others. Ellen greeted her warmly, asking her about her journey into politics and her thoughts on creating change. At first, everything seemed fine. They laughed at a few light-hearted moments, and Jasmine shared inspiring stories of overcoming challenges early in her career. But then, the conversation took a turn. Ellen asked Jasmine why she thought so many people criticized her approach, suggesting that maybe her tone sometimes came off as too aggressive. Jasmine didn't flinch. With a calm yet firm voice, she explained that being assertive wasn't about aggression. It was about refusing to stay silent while injustices persisted. Ellen nodded along, seemingly understanding. But moments later, something unexpected happened. As Jasmine passionately argued her point, Ellen interrupted her mid-sentence. What she said next would spark outrage across the nation. Maybe, Ellen quipped, half-jokingly, or so it seemed, you should just go back to Africa. The room froze. The laughter that had filled the space only seconds before evaporated instantly. Even the crew, usually buzzing with activity, went eerily quiet. Some members of the audience exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Others sat frozen, mouths slightly open in disbelief. For Jasmine, time seemed to slow down. She blinked once, twice, processing the weight of those words. Then, without missing a beat, she leaned forward in her chair, her eyes locking onto Ellen's. There was no anger in her expression, just a piercing intensity that made everyone watching hold their breath. Whatever response Jasmine gave in, that moment it was clear this exchange wasn't going to fade away quietly. Little did anyone know, this incident was about to ignite a firestorm unlike anything either woman had faced before. Social media platforms were already buzzing even before the episode aired. Once it hit televisions across the country, the fallout would be impossible to ignore. And yet, amidst the chaos, Jasmine had a plan. One that would not only challenge Ellen, but also force the entire nation to confront uncomfortable truths about race, language, and accountability. But that part of the story was still days away. For now, all eyes were glued to the screen, waiting to see how this unfolding drama would play out. The moment Ellen's words left her mouth, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. It was as if a heavy cloud had descended over everyone present. Jasmine sat there, composed but visibly processing what had just happened. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the awkward silence that followed. Ellen, realizing the gravity of her comment, tried to laugh it off with a nervous chuckle, saying something about how she was just kidding. But the damage was done. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. By the time the episode ended, the clip of Ellen's comment had already been uploaded online. Within minutes, social media erupted. People couldn't believe what they were seeing or hearing. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire across platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hashtags like Ellen Apologize and Stand with Jasmine began trending almost immediately. Memes, reactions, and heated debates flooded timelines worldwide. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some people defended Ellen, claiming she didn't mean any harm. After all, she was known for her light-hearted jokes and playful banter on her show. Surely this was just another example of her trying to be funny, right? Others weren't so forgiving. They pointed out that phrases like "go back to Africa" carried deep historical pain and were often used to dismiss or demean Black individuals. For many, this wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a reminder of the systemic racism embedded in society. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained silent. She didn't storm off the stage after Ellen's comment, nor did she lash out during the interview. Instead, she finished the segment with grace, answering Ellen's remaining questions calmly before thanking the host and leaving the set. Her composure only added to the intrigue. Viewers were left wondering, what was she thinking? Was she planning to address the situation later? Or would she let it slide? As hours turned into days, the pressure mounted. News outlets began dissecting the incident, replaying the clip endlessly while debating its implications. Talk show hosts weighed in, some siding with Ellen, others supporting Jasmine. Late-night comedians even made jokes about it, though not everyone found them funny. The entire country seemed divided, with conversations around race, privilege, and accountability taking center stage. Ellen, sensing the growing backlash, knew she had to act quickly. 2 days after the episode aired, she released a video apology on her official social media accounts. In the clip, she appeared sincere, explaining that her comment had been unintentional and apologizing if anyone felt hurt by her words. "I'm truly sorry," she said, looking directly into the camera. "That's not who I am, and it's not what I stand for." But the response to her apology was mixed. Some fans appreciated her effort, praising her for owning up to her mistake. Others felt her apology lacked depth. They argued that simply saying, "I'm sorry," wasn't enough, especially when the comment had struck such a raw nerve for so many people. Critics pointed out that Ellen hadn't addressed the deeper issue behind her remark, why those words carried so much weight, and why they resonated with centuries of discrimination faced by Black communities. While Ellen tried to move past the controversy, Jasmine continued to stay quiet. She avoided interviews and declined invitations to discuss the incident on other shows. Her silence only fueled speculation. Was she strategizing her next move? Planning a lawsuit? Preparing a scathing rebuttal? No one knew for sure. And the more she stayed out of the spotlight, the more curious people became. Behind the scenes, however, Jasmine was anything but idle. She spent hours reflecting on what had happened, consulting with close friends, family members, and colleagues about how best to respond. She understood the power of her platform and knew that whatever she said, or didn't say, would have a lasting impact. This wasn't just about her. It was about using the moment to spark meaningful change. As the days passed, the tension only grew thicker. Protesters gathered outside Ellen's studio, holding signs that read, "Kindness matters," and "Accountability over apologies." Supporters of both women clashed online, turning comment sections into battlegrounds. Even Ellen's own fan base seemed split, with some calling for boycotts of her show while others rallied to defend her. Amidst all the chaos, one thing became clear: the world was waiting for Jasmine's response. Everyone wanted to know how she would handle the situation. Would she demand an apology, call for Ellen to step down from her show, or would she take a completely different approach altogether? Finally, after nearly a week of silence, Jasmine broke her silence, but not in the way anyone expected. She announced that she would address the incident live on national television during a primetime special. The announcement sent shockwaves through the media landscape. Speculation ran wild about what she might say. Some predicted a fiery condemnation of Ellen, while others hoped for a message of reconciliation. Whatever it was, millions tuned in to watch, eager to hear her side of the story. The stage was set. Millions of eyes were glued to their screens, hearts racing with anticipation. What Jasmine was about to say would not only shape public perception of the incident, but also redefine how the nation approached conversations about race, forgiveness, and understanding. Little did anyone know, her response would leave the entire country speechless, and perhaps even inspire a new chapter in the ongoing fight for equality. Copy Ask Explain. The night of Jasmine's primetime special finally arrived, and the anticipation was electric. People from all corners of the country tuned in, some out of curiosity, others out of sheer eagerness to see how she would handle the situation. The calendar. Media buzzed with predictions, memes, and hashtags as viewers prepared themselves for what promised to be a pivotal moment. Even Ellen, who had been laying low since her apology video, reportedly watched from home, unsure of what to expect. The stage was set simply yet powerfully. A single chair sat center stage, bathed in soft lighting. Behind it, a large screen displayed images of historical landmarks tied to African heritage, a subtle nod to the themes Jasmine planned to address. As the camera panned across the studio, audience, you could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another talk show, this was history unfolding before everyone's eyes. When Jasmine walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. She looked calm but determined, dressed in a striking outfit that radiated strength and dignity. She didn't rush to speak. Instead, she stood there for a few seconds, taking in the energy of the room, letting the significance of the moment settle over everyone. Then with a deep breath, she began to talk. "I want to start by saying thank you," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Thank you for being here tonight, whether you're sitting in this room or watching from your homes. Thank you for caring enough to listen. Because tonight isn't about me, it's about us, all of us." Her opening line immediately grabbed attention. It wasn't confrontational or angry. In fact, it was almost disarming in its simplicity. She went on to explain that while many people expected her to come out swinging, she wanted to take a different approach, one rooted in understanding rather than division. Then she did something unexpected. She shared a deeply personal story. Growing up, Jasmine often heard stories from her grandmother about their family's journey through slavery and segregation. Her grandmother would recount tales passed down through generations, stories of resilience, survival, and hope. One particular memory stood out. Her grandmother describing how enslaved Africans were forced onto ships bound for America, stripped of their identities and freedom. Jasmine paused, her voice cracking slightly as she recounted these details. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. She explained how phrases like "go back to Africa" had long been used as weapons to dismiss, degrade, and dehumanize Black Americans. For centuries, those words carried a sting far beyond their surface meaning. They weren't just hurtful. They erased the sacrifices and struggles of countless ancestors who had fought to build a better future. But here's the thing, Jasmine continued, regaining her composure. This isn't just about me, and it isn't just about one person saying something wrong. It's bigger than that. Words matter. Language shapes how we see each other and ourselves. And when someone says, "go back to Africa," whether they mean harm or not, it taps into a legacy of exclusion and pain. At this point, the audience was visibly moved. Some wiped away tears, while others nodded in agreement. Jasmine wasn't just speaking to them. She was speaking for them, for anyone who had ever felt marginalized or misunderstood because of their race or background. Her vulnerability created a connection that transcended politics or fame. But then, instead of turning her focus solely on Ellen, Jasmine shifted gears. She acknowledged that mistakes happen, even unintentionally. "We live in a world where biases are ingrained in us from birth," she said. "They aren't always obvious, but they're there. None of us is immune, not me, not you, not anyone. What matters most is how we respond when those biases surface. She emphasized the importance of education and empathy, urging viewers to reflect on their own actions and attitudes. Accountability doesn't mean tearing each other down, she added. It means holding space for growth. It means recognizing our flaws and working together to do better. Just when it seemed like the speech was wrapping up, Jasmine dropped a bombshell. She announced that she wanted to invite Ellen to join her on a trip to Ghana, West Africa. The room gasped audibly. Cameras captured shocked expressions from members of the audience. No one saw this coming. This isn't about punishment, Jasmine clarified quickly. It's about learning. There's a place in Ghana called Cape Coast Castle. It's where thousands of enslaved Africans were held before being shipped across the Atlantic. Walking through those dungeons, seeing the chains, feeling the weight of history, it changes you. I think it could help both of us, and maybe even the rest of the country, understand why moments like this matter. Her proposal left viewers stunned. Was she serious? Would Ellen agree to such a bold gesture? Critics might have expected anger or demands for retribution, but Jasmine's response was anything but predictable. By extending an olive branch, she transformed the narrative entirely. This wasn't just about calling out wrongdoing. It was about bridging divides and fostering understanding. As the broadcast wrapped up, Jasmine ended with a powerful message. Change starts with conversation, she said firmly. And sometimes, those conversations require us to step outside our comfort zones. If we can face the hard truths together, we can also find healing together. The audience erupted into applause once again, this time louder and more heartfelt. Millions watching at home took to social media to share their thoughts. Some praised Jasmine's grace under pressure, while others marveled at her ability to turn a painful moment into an opportunity for growth. The hashtag #JoshUnityTrip to Ghana began trending within minutes, with people debating whether Ellen should accept the invitation. For Ellen, the ball was now in her court. The spotlight was brighter than ever, and the world waited anxiously to see what she would do next. Would she embrace the challenge, or would fear of further backlash keep her from taking the first step toward reconciliation? What happened next would not only test Ellen's willingness to grow, but also redefine how the nation approached conversations about race, forgiveness, and accountability. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain. Jasmine's response had already sparked a movement, one that reminded everyone of the power of compassion and courage in the face of adversity. Ellen's response to Jasmine's invitation didn't come immediately. In fact, it took a few days before she addressed the proposal publicly. Those days felt like an eternity for fans on both sides of the debate. Social media was ablaze with speculation. Would Ellen accept or decline? Could this trip actually happen, or was it just a symbolic gesture that would fizzle out? When Ellen finally broke her silence, she did so in a way that surprised everyone. She appeared on a late-night talk show not as the host but as a guest. Sitting across from the interviewer, she looked noticeably more reserved than usual. Gone was the bubbly charm and quick wit. Instead, there was a quiet vulnerability about her. For the first time, she seemed genuinely unsure of herself. "I've thought long and hard about what Jasmine said," Ellen began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "And honestly, I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to say no, to stay in my comfort zone and avoid risking more backlash. But then I realized something. This isn't about me being comfortable. It's about doing what's right." The audience leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Ellen went on to explain that while she hadn't intended harm with her comment, she now understood why it had struck such a deep chord. "I can't change the past," she admitted, "but I can try to learn from it. And if going to Ghana helps me better understand the weight of those words and the history behind them, then I owe it to myself and to others to take that step." Her decision to accept Jasmine's invitation sent shockwaves through the country. Some praised her bravery, calling it a bold move toward reconciliation. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether this was just a PR stunt to salvage her reputation. Debates raged online with hashtags like Kang's Ellen's Journey and Facing History dominating Twitter feeds. As plans for the trip began to take shape, cameras followed every step. Producers documented their preparations, capturing intimate moments as both women prepared for what promised to be an emotional journey. Viewers got glimpses of Ellen reading books about the transatlantic slave trade and watching documentaries about African history. Meanwhile, Jasmine shared stories from her own visits to Ghana, describing the profound impact the experience had on her life. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The two women met at the airport, exchanging polite greetings before boarding the plane together. There was no grand hug or dramatic moment, just a quiet acknowledgement of the road ahead. As they settled into their seats, it was clear that neither of them fully knew what to expect. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a pilgrimage of sorts, one that required them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world around them. Their first stop in Ghana was Cape Coast Castle, one of the most infamous slave forts along the coast. Stepping inside, the air grew heavy with history. The walls were damp, the floors uneven, and the narrow passageways felt suffocating. Guided by local historians, Ellen and Jasmine walked through the dungeons where enslaved Africans were once held captive. Chains still hung from the walls, rusted but intact, a haunting reminder of the atrocities committed centuries ago. Ellen's face said it all. Her eyes widened in disbelief as the guide described how hundreds of people were crammed into tiny cells without sunlight or fresh air. She touched the cold stone walls, her fingers trembling slightly. At one point, she turned to Jasmine and whispered, "How do you even begin to process this?" Jasmine nodded, her expression somber. "You don't," she replied softly. "Not really. You carry it with you. It becomes part of who you are." Later, they visited the Door of No Return, a narrow doorway leading to the sea where enslaved Africans boarded ships bound for the Americas. Standing there, Ellen visibly struggled to hold back tears. She imagined families torn apart, children crying for parents they'd never see again. It was overwhelming, almost too much to bear. Throughout the trip, conversations between the two women flowed naturally. They talked about privilege, bias, and the importance of listening to voices that had been silenced for far too long. Ellen confessed that she'd spent years thinking she was immune to racism because of her progressive image, but now she realized how blind spots could creep in unnoticed. "I thought kindness meant avoiding conflict," she admitted during one candid moment. "But sometimes real kindness means having tough conversations, even when they make you uncomfortable." Jasmine listened intently, nodding occasionally but also challenging Ellen when necessary. She reminded her that understanding wasn't a one-time event, it was an ongoing process. "Growth doesn't happen overnight," she said. "It takes work, but it's worth it." By the end of the trip, something remarkable had happened. What started as a tense partnership had evolved into genuine camaraderie. Ellen and Jasmine weren't just colleagues anymore. They were allies working toward a shared goal. Their bond wasn't built on perfection, but on honesty and humility. Both women recognized that they were flawed individuals navigating complex issues, but they were willing to learn. On their final night in Ghana, they sat together under the stars, reflecting on everything they'd experienced. Ellen thanked Jasmine for inviting her, saying it was one of the hardest yet most transformative experiences of her life. Jasmine smiled, acknowledging the progress they'd made but reminding Ellen that the real work lay ahead. "This is just the beginning," Jasmine said firmly. "The lessons we've learned here, they need to translate into action. Words are important, but actions define us." Ellen nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She promised to use her platform to amplify marginalized voices and educate others about racial sensitivity. More importantly, she vowed to keep challenging herself, to remain open to growth, even when it was uncomfortable. As they packed their bags the next morning, ready to return home, it was clear that both women had been forever changed. The trip hadn't erased the pain caused by Ellen's initial comment, nor had it solved centuries of systemic inequality, but it had planted seeds of hope, seeds that could grow into meaningful change if nurtured properly. For millions of viewers, tuning in to watch snippets of their journey, the message was simple yet powerful. Healing begins when we're brave enough to face our past, listen to each other, and commit to doing better. And sometimes, the hardest steps forward are the ones that lead us back to our roots, our humanity, and ultimately to each other. When Ellen and Jasmine returned to the U.S., the energy around their journey was electric. People couldn't stop talking about it. Clips of their time in Ghana had been shared widely on social media, showing moments both poignant and raw. From Ellen's tearful reaction at Cape Coast Castle to Jasmine's quiet strength as she guided her through the history, every frame seemed to carry weight. The nation watched intently, waiting to see how this chapter would unfold. The first major step came when Ellen announced that she would join Jasmine on a live platform to address the entire situation. This wasn't just another talk show appearance, it was billed as a conversation for healing. Hosted by a neutral moderator, the event promised to be unfiltered and honest. Tickets sold out within hours, and millions more tuned in from home, eager to witness what many hoped would be a turning point in the ongoing dialogue about race and accountability. On the day of the event, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The stage was set simply: 2 chairs, a small table between them, and a large screen behind displaying images of the places they'd visited in Ghana. When Ellen and Jasmine walked out together, the audience erupted into applause. It was clear that something had shifted between them. There was no tension, no guardedness. Instead, there was a sense of mutual respect, even camaraderie. The moderator opened the conversation by asking Ellen to share her thoughts on the trip. Ellen took a deep breath before speaking, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'll be honest," she began. "Going to Ghana was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Seeing those dungeons standing at the door of no return, it broke me in ways I didn't expect, but it also woke me up." She paused, looking directly at Jasmine. "Before this, I thought I understood racism because I've always tried to be kind. But kindness isn't enough if you're not willing to listen, to really hear what people are saying. And that's where I failed. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and for that, I am deeply sorry." Her apology felt different this time, not rehearsed or polished for public consumption, but raw and genuine. She went on to explain how the trip had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. "I realized that my privilege has shielded me from so much pain. I've spent my life thinking I was helping others, but I wasn't always listening to how they wanted to be helped. That's something I need to work on every single day." Jasmine listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When it was her turn to speak, she acknowledged Ellen's growth while reminding everyone of the bigger picture. "Ellen's apology matters," she said firmly. "But let's not forget why we're here. This isn't just about one comment or one person. It's about recognizing the patterns that exist in our society, the biases, the microaggressions, the systems that keep certain groups down while lifting others up." She emphasized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, it was about creating space for change. "What Ellen did takes courage," Jasmine continued. "Not everyone is willing to step outside their comfort zone like this, but courage is only the beginning. Real progress happens when we take action, when we use our platforms to educate, uplift, and advocate for justice." As the conversation unfolded, the moderator posed questions from the audience, many of which touched on practical steps for moving forward. Ellen shared her plans to partner with organizations focused on racial equity, pledging financial support and using her influence to amplify their work. She also announced that she would dedicate segments of her show to discussions about unconscious bias, inviting experts and activists to lead these conversations. Jasmine, meanwhile, encouraged viewers to engage in similar self-reflection. "We all have blind spots," she reminded everyone. "The key is to acknowledge them and do the work to grow. Whether you're a celebrity or just someone trying to make a difference in your community, the responsibility is the same: to learn, to listen, and to act." One particularly powerful moment came when a young woman from the audience stood up to ask a question. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I'm mixed race, and growing up I heard comments like, 'Go back to where you came from,' more times than I can count. They stayed with me. They shaped how I saw myself. How do we move past that kind of hurt? The room fell silent as Jasmine leaned forward to respond. You start by reclaiming your story, she said gently. Those words were meant to erase you, to make you feel less than. But you're still here. You're strong and you're worthy. Surround yourself with people who affirm that truth, and don't be afraid to call out injustice when you see it. Ellen chimed in, adding, and to anyone who might have said those words without realizing the harm they cause, I urge you to think twice next time. Words have power. Use them wisely. By the end of the evening, the mood in the room had transformed. What began as a tense gathering full of uncertainty had evolved into a celebration of resilience and hope. People hugged each other as they left the venue, inspired by what they'd witnessed. Social media lit up with messages of gratitude, with viewers praising Ellen and Jasmine for modeling accountability and empathy. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Critics argued that a single trip and heartfelt apology couldn't undo years of systemic inequality. Some accused Ellen of performing redemption theater, suggesting that her actions were motivated by a desire to protect her brand rather than genuine remorse. Others pointed out that true reconciliation required more than symbolic gestures. It demanded sustained effort and policy changes. Despite the skeptics, however, the impact of the event was undeniable. Schools began incorporating lessons about the transatlantic slave trade into their curriculums, inspired by the footage from Ellen and Jasmine's trip. Corporations revisited their diversity initiatives, vowing to prioritize inclusion at every level. Even local communities organized discussions about race, drawing inspiration from the vulnerability displayed on stage that night. For Ellen, the journey was far from over. She knew that earning trust would take time, and that slip-ups were inevitable along the way. But she seemed determined to stay the course, leaning into discomfort whenever it arose. Friends close to her reported that she'd become more intentional in her interactions, actively seeking feedback and holding herself accountable. Jasmine, too, continued to push for change. While she appreciated Ellen's efforts, she remained laser-focused on the broader fight for equality. This moment is important, she told reporters after the event, but it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. We can't afford to get complacent. There's still so much work to be done. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of their partnership became increasingly evident. Documentaries exploring the legacy of slavery gained renewed interest, thanks in part to clips of Ellen and Jasmine's visit to Ghana. Conversations about race entered mainstream discourse in ways they hadn't before, with people from all walks of life joining the dialogue. Perhaps most importantly, the story served as a reminder that growth is possible, even in the face of profound mistakes. By choosing vulnerability over defensiveness, Ellen and Jasmine had shown the world that healing begins when we're willing to confront hard truths together. Their journey wasn't perfect, nor was it easy, but it proved that even the deepest divides could be bridged with empathy, humility, and a commitment to understanding. And as the final credits rolled on the documentary capturing their experience, one line lingered on the screen, a simple yet profound message that summed up everything they'd learned. Change starts with a single step. Take it. Months had passed since Ellen and Jasmine's live conversation, but the impact of their journey continued to resonate across the country. It wasn't just a fleeting moment in the news cycle. It had sparked something deeper, a collective reckoning that pushed people to reflect on their own biases and actions. The ripple effects were everywhere. From classrooms to corporate boardrooms, conversations about race, privilege, and accountability became part of everyday life. Ellen, for her part, kept her promise to stay engaged. She didn't retreat back into the comfort of her usual routines. Instead, she leaned into the discomfort, using her platform to amplify voices that had long been ignored. Her daytime show underwent a noticeable transformation. Where once it was filled with lighthearted games and celebrity banter, now entire episodes were dedicated to discussing systemic racism, unconscious bias, and allyship. Experts, activists, and community leaders became regular guests, sharing insights that challenged viewers to think critically about the world around them. One episode stood out in particular. A panel of educators joined Ellen to talk about how schools could better teach children about racial history. They shared stories of students who had never learned about the transatlantic slave trade or Jim Crow laws, gaps in education that left young minds unprepared to grapple with modern issues of inequality. By the end of the segment, Ellen announced a partnership with an organization focused on creating inclusive curriculums. She pledged funding to help develop resources for teachers and students alike, ensuring that future generations wouldn't grow up unaware of the struggles that shaped their nation. Jasmine, meanwhile, remained steadfast in her advocacy work. While some might have expected her to step back after such a high-profile collaboration, she doubled down on her efforts. She traveled across the country, speaking at town halls, universities, and community centers. Her message was consistent yet evolving. Unity required more than just apologies. It demanded action. She encouraged people to look beyond grand gestures and focus on the small daily choices that could lead to meaningful change. Things like supporting Black-owned businesses, listening to marginalized voices without interrupting, and calling out injustice when they saw it. But perhaps the most surprising development came when Ellen and Jasmine decided to team up again. Not for another public event, but for something quieter and more personal. Together, they launched a mentorship program aimed at empowering young women of color. The initiative paired participants with mentors from various fields, offering guidance, networking opportunities, and financial support to help them pursue their dreams. It was a project born out of their shared belief that representation mattered, and that investing in the next generation was one of the most powerful ways to create lasting change. The first cohort of mentees included aspiring scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, and activists. One participant, a high school senior passionate about environmental justice, described how the program gave her the confidence to apply for college scholarships she'd previously thought were out of reach. Another, a budding filmmaker, credited her mentor with helping her navigate the challenges of breaking into an industry dominated by gatekeepers who looked nothing like her. These stories weren't just inspiring, they were proof that progress was possible when people committed to lifting each other up. As word spread about the mentorship program, others began stepping forward to contribute. Celebrities offered internships to participants. Corporations provided grants to fund projects dreamed up by the mentees. Even ordinary citizens found ways to get involved, volunteering their time or donating resources to ensure the program's success. What started as a small idea between two women grew into a movement that touched countless lives. Back in Ghana, the trip Ellen and Jasmine took together had also left a lasting impression. Local communities welcomed the attention brought to Cape Coast Castle and other historical sites, using the increased tourism to fund preservation efforts and educational programs. Schools near the castle organized field trips so students could learn about their ancestors' resilience firsthand. And thanks to Ellen's donations, a new museum exhibit opened, featuring artifacts and stories that highlighted the strength and creativity of African cultures before colonization. For Ellen, returning to Ghana, even if only virtually through updates and photos, was a reminder of how far she'd come. Friends close to her said she'd changed in subtle but significant ways. She laughed less during interviews, choosing instead to speak thoughtfully about the lessons she'd learned. Her humor hadn't disappeared, but it was tempered now with a sense of responsibility, a recognition that her words carried weight and needed to be used wisely. Jasmine, too, noticed a shift, not just in Ellen, but in society as a whole. People seemed more willing to have difficult conversations, even when those discussions made them uncomfortable. Social media, once a breeding ground for division, became a space where individuals shared resources, celebrated victories, and held each other accountable. Hashtags like #ListenToLearn and #ActForChange replaced the divisive rhetoric that had once dominated timelines. Still, neither woman pretended that the work was done. In interviews, they often reminded audiences that progress wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, moments of frustration, and days when the weight of injustice felt overwhelming. But they urged people not to give up. "Change isn't easy," Jasmine said during one speech. It's messy, painful, and slow, but every step forward matters, even the smallest ones. By the time the one-year anniversary of their initial confrontation rolled around, Ellen and Jasmine marked the occasion with a joint interview. Sitting side by side, they reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful day. Ellen admitted that she still struggled sometimes, especially when faced with criticism. "Growth is hard," she confessed. "There are days when I want to shut down, to tell myself I've done enough. But then I remember why we started this journey. To make things better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." Jasmine nodded, adding, "And let's be clear, this isn't about perfection. None of us gets it right all the time. What matters is that we keep trying. We keep showing up even when it's hard." Their bond had deepened over the months, built not on perfection, but on shared vulnerability and mutual respect. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were partners in a mission bigger than either of them. When asked what advice they'd give to others hoping to bridge divides, their answers were simple: listen, learn, and act. "Start by listening," Jasmine said. "Really listen, not just to respond, but to understand. Then educate yourself. Read books, watch documentaries, talk to people whose experiences are different from yours. And finally, take action. Speak up when you see injustice. Use your voice, your resources, your influence to make a difference." Ellen echoed her sentiments, emphasizing the importance of humility. "None of us has all the answers," she said. "But if we approach these conversations with open hearts and minds, we can figure things out together." As the interview wrapped up, the moderator asked one final question: what did the future hold for them? Both women smiled, knowing full well that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. But they also knew that they weren't walking it alone. Together, they had shown the world that healing was possible, that even the deepest wounds could begin to mend when met with empathy and effort. The camera panned out as they stood to leave, shaking hands and exchanging a quiet laugh. Behind them, a screen displayed the words they'd repeated throughout their journey: "Unity starts with understanding." It was a fitting end to a story that had begun with conflict but ended with hope, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and connection.